Alright guys, so we're going to be doing some of the problems that we did today during class. Okay, this is my unit circle, which I'm going to be using, and I'll be providing for you guys during class too. So let's find the following. Sine at 45 degrees angles and cotangent at 3 pi over 4. So 45 degrees. Again, if you don't like degrees, you can go to radians. I prefer radians than degrees. And for this, if I were to rewrite it in terms of radians, I would write sine of and 45 degrees in radians. That's going to be that is going to be pi over 4. Alright, pi over 4. So that is that. Sine at pi over 4. Now, the next thing is to go to my unit circle and look where is sine of pi over 4. As we can see, sine of pi over 4, well, pi over 4 is there. Remember, it's cosine, comma, sine. So this is my sine, root 2 over 2. I'm gonna go back to my paper. So sine at pi over 4, as we saw in the unit circle, is equals to root 2 over 2. That's the easy one. Now, cotangent. We have to remember one thing. We have to remember that cotangent is theta is equal to cosine of whatever angle we're looking for divided by sine of whatever the angle we're looking for. So I have cotangent of 3 pi over 4. Just a big hint, unless you didn't notice, because you didn't notice, everything that it's over 4, like 3 pi over 4, or just by itself pi over 4, or 5 pi over 4, anything that it's over 4, it's going to have the intervals root 2 over 2, either positive or negative. So cotangent at 3 pi over 4. So let's go to my unit circle and look for 3 pi over 4. And 3 pi over 4 is 1 pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4. There it is in red. 3 pi over 4. So for 3 pi over 4, I'm going to use both sine and cosine. Okay, I noticed that my sine is negative root 2. I mean, my cosine is negative root 2 over 2, and my sine is positive root 2 over 2. So my cosine, it's going to be negative root 2 over 2, negative square root of 2 over 2, all that over positive root 2 over 2. Here, well, one thing divided by itself, it's always equal to 1, but in this case it's going to be negative 1. And that's it for this one. Now the next one we're going to be doing are the ones where we have negative radians or negative angles. So the next one to do, it's going to be cosine of negative 120 degrees. Cosine of 120. Alright. This one, I don't like, again, I told you I don't like working with degrees. I prefer radians. So I'm going to make this 120 into radians. I'm going to have the 120. 120. And then that I'm going to multiply it by pi over 180. The zeros cancel out. 12 is 6 times 2, and 18 is 6 times 3. So the 6's will cancel out. I'll be left with the 2 and the pi and the 3 in the denominator. So finding cosine of 120, it'll be the same thing as finding cosine of negative 2 pi over 3. Nice. Well, let's look for, well, negative 2 pi over 3. Alright, so in my unit circle, one of them, it goes by 6. It goes by 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, 3 pi over 6, so on and so forth. So if I were to rewrite this as a pi over 6, I would rewrite it, again this, I will rewrite it as negative 4 pi over 6. This way it'll be easier. Here I know you can find the 2 pi over 3. You see 2 pi over 3, you can find it well, on the positive side really easy, but on the negative side it's going to be a little bit harder. You're going to have to use the ones that go by thirds, but in this case, instead of going counterclockwise, you're going to have to go clockwise. For this unit circle, I'm going to skip the fourths because the fourth doesn't go by sixth. This goes by a sixth. This goes another sixth. But it's just simplified. That's why we get a third. So I'm going to go by 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, 3 pi over 6, 4 pi over 6, 5 pi over 6, 6 pi over 6, and so on. I'm looking for 4 pi over 6. So 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, 3 pi over 6, 4 pi over 6. This will be my 4 pi over 6. It'll be the negative one because I'm going counterclockwise. Okay? But because I know how to count the pi over 6, I can identify this to be the negative 4 pi over 6, or simplify it to negative 2 pi over 3. This is my cosine, and this is my sine. And I'm looking for my cosine. So it'll be, cosine will be negative 1/2. Negative 1/2. And that's it for that one specific. Okay, now that we know the process, let's do the next one that I gave you during class, which was secant of negative 5 pi over 6. Alright, negative 5 pi over 6. That's the next one. I'm going to use my unit circle. Again, it doesn't have to be the unit circle with the negatives. I can count by sixth, and I'll be able to get the negative 5 pi over 6. It's negative, so I have to go clockwise. 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, 3 pi over 6, 4 pi over 6, 6 pi over 6. My green one, it's my 5 pi over 6, my negative 5 pi over 6. And my points, there I have them. So I'm looking for secant. Remember that secant, it's the one that it's 1 over cosine, and my cosine, it's negative root 3 over 2. This is going to be 1 over the cosine of negative 5 pi over 6. So my answer is going to be 1 over, and we know that cosine at negative 5 pi over 6, which was going clockwise, is negative root 3 over 2. And then I told you that simplifying a fraction that is under 1, it'll just be the reciprocal of the fraction. So negative 2 over the square root of 3. Alright, and this will be my answer. This is my answer. So basically the only tricky thing, it's in terms of the negatives, it's like counting them. And again, here we have the 2 unit circles that we learned to like put together. If you're going by sets, you have to go counterclockwise. This is 1/6, this is 2/6, which simplifies to 1/3. There you go, 1/3. This is 3/6, which simplifies to 1/2. 3/6, 1/2. 4/6, which simplifies to 2 pi over 3. 5/6, and then 6/6. Notice that I am skipping the red one. I'm skipping the red one, and I'm only counting the green one, the blue one, sorry about that, and the black one. Alright, for the other unit circle that goes by fourths, I'll be counting the red one and the black one again. 1 pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, which simplifies to pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, and 4 pi over 4, which simplifies to just pi.